Imagine a young woman found in her car, tires spinning against the garage door like something out of a movie. But for Galar Berzad, a young Iranian activist living in Texas, this was tragically her reality. And as investigators descended upon the scene in Carmine, Texas, they found themselves facing a puzzle that seemed almost impossible to solve.
What was really striking right away was the lack of any kind of motive.
Hmm.
This wasn't some robbery. Her purse, her wallet, even her phone were all untouched.
It's the kind of case that really makes you wonder about your own safety.
Exactly. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of sexual assault.
So it's like someone just walked up to her car and ended her life just like that, leaving a community in shock and so many questions unanswered.
Right. And it's so important to remember that real life investigations aren't like those TV dramas that wrap up everything in an hour.
Oh, definitely. This case was full of dead ends, frustration, and the agonizing wait for answers that felt like they might never come.
Yeah. And it all started with two names that immediately came up.
Rabin Galler's ex-boyfriend, who'd been on the phone with her moments before her death, and Corey, her current boyfriend, and the last person to see her alive.
And both relationships had potential motives.
Jealousy, anger, possessiveness.
The kind of things that can turn deadly, and the police had to explore those possibilities.
No matter how uncomfortable or personal.
Right, and they scrutinized Rabin's social media. They found that photo of him with a table full of guns.
I mean, that's a pretty jarring image, don't you think? Especially in Texas.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder, what's the story here? Is it just showing off or something more sinister?
And in this case, Rabin said those were his colleagues' guns used for hunting trips.
But it definitely raised eyebrows.
Even if the police couldn't connect those weapons to the .38 caliber handgun that was used in Galler's murder.
Right.
So that lead kind of fizzled out, at least for now. But what about Corey, he told investigators? Galler had surprised him at his place that night.
He was studying for this big exam, but he couldn't resist her enthusiasm.
Ugh. It's a pretty tragic story. He was even the one who told her to text him when she got home safe.
A text that never came, and his alibi checked out. Thankfully, phone records put him at home when it happened. He was even on calls with family members.
Can you imagine finding out about your girlfriend's death from a news reporter while you're visiting her house hoping she's okay?
It's heartbreaking, and so while both boyfriends were eventually ruled out as suspects, the investigators didn't have much to go on.
Remember that cigarette butt they found at the scene? For a while, it seemed like that could be the key to solving the whole thing.
It's amazing how something as small as a cigarette butt can be so important, but the lab couldn't get any usable DNA from it.
It may be rain contamination, who knows, but
Yeah.
that promising lead turned into another dead end.
Yeah, and it seemed like every lead they followed led to a dead end. They even looked into those carjackings that were happening around the same time in the same area.
Wondering if Galler was just an innocent bystander caught in the wrong place at the wrong time.
It's a chilling thought, but the carjackers used shotguns. Remember, not the .38 caliber handgun they found.
Another dead end. And they even investigated a lawsuit that Galler's father was involved in.
Right. Money can be a powerful motive, and sometimes people go to extremes to protect their finances.
So they had to look into every possible angle, even if it seemed like a long shot.
And imagine the pressure they were under trying to make sense of all this information, just desperate to find something that would lead them to the killer.
But as weeks turned into months, it felt like the trail had gone cold. Galler's family was desperate for answers, and they decided to take matters into their own hands.
They announced a $200,000 reward for information.
The largest Crime Stoppers reward in the country at that time.
It was a bold move.
A plea for anyone to come forward with that one piece of information that could break the case open.
It really shows how determined they were to get justice for Galler. They knew someone out there had the key to solving this puzzle.
But even with that huge reward, the tips they got didn't lead anywhere.
It was like that image the detective described, the smell of burnt rubber, the car spinning its wheels going nowhere fast.
But just when it felt like all hope was lost, a shocking development.
Another murder that shook everyone who knew and loved Galler.
And this time, the victim was someone very close to her.
So we left off with a chilling new development, a second murder that just really shattered that idea that Galler's death might have been an isolated incident.
And it wasn't just any murder. The victim was Dilara Bagherzadeh, a close friend of Galler's.
And just like Galler, a prominent activist in the Iranian community, it's hard to even imagine the pain of losing one friend to such senseless violence and then to have it happen again.
To someone so close.
Exactly. And what was so striking was the timing. almost a year to the day after Galler's murder.
That's got to send chills down your spine.
Right, in criminal investigations, coincidence is always a red flag. You see a pattern like that, and it just makes you wonder, are we dealing with a serial killer? Is someone targeting these women specifically?
Because of their activism or their background?
It's like suddenly realizing you're not dealing with a random act, but something much more calculated, more sinister. You start questioning everything.
Wondering if there were signs you missed, motives, connections.
And for investigators, that pressure just intensifies. They're not just trying to solve a crime, but trying to prevent another one. It's a race against time to connect the dots before the killer strikes again.
And for the families involved, it's just another layer of fear.
The fear that they could lose another loved one to this seemingly unstoppable force. So let's talk about the details of this second murder, the crime scene. How does it compare to Galler's case? Were there any similarities in the way it was carried out?
In the method?
Well, there were some chilling parallels. In Jalara's case, there was a witness who saw a car speeding away from the scene, a silver or light blue Honda Accord or Toyota Camry.
Wait a minute, that's the same description the neighbor gave in Galler's case? Could it be the same car?
It's possible, right? And that possibility had investigators scrambling, checking license plates, reviewing traffic camera footage, anything that might lead them to that vehicle.
But even if they found the car, you still have to prove who was driving it. Connect that person to both murders.
And then there's the biggest question of all.
Why? What could possibly motivate someone to target these two women?
Was it their activism, their outspoken nature, personal grudges? Were they just in the wrong place at the wrong time?
So many questions and not enough answers. This feeling that we've barely scratched the surface.
It's like that feeling you get when you're walking alone in the woods and you suddenly realize you're being watched. You can't see anyone, but you know you're not alone. And that's the scariest part, not knowing who or what is out there lurking in the shadows.
And this second murder just throws everything we thought we knew into chaos. It forces us to re-examine the evidence, the potential motives, everything.
It really highlights how real-life investigations are rarely straightforward. You know, they're often messy, chaotic, full of unexpected twists and turns that can lead to dead ends or completely change your perspective.
And in this case, the truth was about to take a turn that no one could have predicted. So join us for the final part of this deep dive as we explore the shocking developments that followed this second murder and finally uncover the truth behind this complex and disturbing case. We're back, and the mystery just keeps getting deeper. Two murders a year apart, both victims connected to Galler. That same car description, the calculated violence. It's like we're looking into the void trying to make sense of something that just doesn't make sense.
This is where things get really interesting, but also so much harder, you know? We're past that initial shock, the scramble for clues. Now it's about patience and connecting those tiny details that might reveal the bigger picture.
Like putting together a puzzle with missing pieces.
Exactly. Each one holds a clue, but it only makes sense when you find its place.
And the pressure on the investigators must have been incredible. Two unsolved murders, a potential serial killer, and a community terrified. They had to find a way to break this case wide open.
You needed that missing piece, and they found it, but not where you expect. Remember that $200,000 reward Galler's family offered?
It didn't lead to any solid tips about her murder directly, but
But it did something else. It caught the attention of someone who knew something about Jalara's murder.
so the reward for one murder helped solve the other. That's incredible.
Yeah.
What did this person tell them?
This person pointed the finger at someone completely unexpected, a former roommate of Glara's ex-husband. His name was Ali Irsan, and the informant claimed he had a deep hatred for Galara, blaming her for his friend's divorce.
So we've gone from love and money as motives to something else entirely, pride maybe, a desire for revenge because of a perceived slight against a friend.
It seems almost unbelievable, doesn't it, that someone could be so full of hate and act so violently just because of a friend's divorce. But sadly, we see this kind of thing all the time in these investigations.
Human emotions can be such powerful motivators.
And sometimes they lead people down very dark paths, and as the police looked into Ali Irsan, they found this disturbing pattern of control and violence. He was obsessed with controlling his daughter.
Even going so far as to kill someone she was dating.
Can you imagine taking another person's life just because it's a romantic relationship?
It's terrifying.
It's a level of possessiveness and control that's hard to understand. The investigation uncovered years of threats and intimidation. He was convinced Galara had turned his daughter against him, and he wanted revenge.
So he targeted Galara to protect his family's reputation. That's chilling. But what about Galara? Where does she fit into all of this?
That's where the investigation takes another unexpected turn. Remember, the police never found a solid motive for Galler's murder.
No robbery, no obvious connections. It always felt random, like a horrible coincidence.
Exactly. But with Ali Hassan in custody, a new theory emerged. What if Galler's murder wasn't random at all? What if it was a practice run for Gallar's murder?
You mean he killed Gallard to prepare for killing Galara?
It's a horrifying thought, but it would explain why her case was so baffling. There was no personal connection, no clear motive.
It's like he was using Gallard as a test subject.
Rehearsing for a bigger performance, the pieces started to fit together. Galler lived close to Galler, drove a similar car, and was also a young woman of Middle Eastern descent. Irsan might have seen her as a convenient target, someone to test his plan, his weapon, his ability to get away with murder.
He was dehumanizing her, reducing her to just an obstacle in his way.
And that makes Ali Irsan not just a murderer, but a predator, someone who used one life to take another.
So what happened to Irsan? Did he face justice?
He was charged with both Galler and Galar's murders and eventually convicted of capital murder in Galar's case. He was sentenced to death.
This case has been a real roller coaster of emotions, shock, confusion, frustration, and finally some relief that justice was served even though it can't bring back those two lives.
It's a stark reminder that real life isn't a neat and tidy TV show. Investigations can be long and full of twists and turns, and sometimes the truth is much darker than we can imagine.
But even in the face of that darkness, there are people dedicated to finding the truth and holding those responsible accountable. This deep dive has been quite a journey, and I want to thank you for joining us as we explore this complex case. It's a story that stays with you and a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, and that even in the face of tragedy, the search for truth and justice must continue. What surprised you the most about this case? Let us know in the comments. And as always, keep asking questions, stay curious, and never underestimate the power of even the smallest detail in uncovering the truth.